Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining our weekly Lunch and Learn. We're just going to be fielding general questions about the application. So we can go ahead and get started. I'm sharing my screen now, and just in case we need to walk through anything. See, we got a few attendees. Please feel free to, we've got an open floor for any questions anybody might have. We got a question from Murray in the Q&A panel. Will there be significant changes to the function of the document viewer in version 7? We currently are having issues in version 6 that we're hoping will be resolved. We know with any version change, especially major version changes, we try not to introduce anything that would dramatically change the behavior, such that if you're relying on a feature that it will function, be dysfunctional or have a regression. If you're currently having issues as a result of a defect with the document viewer or something to that effect, that if that's submitted through like a support ticket and we've identified that as a defect, then we should expect that to be resolved in a release of version 7. But I'd have to know a little bit more about what exactly is going wrong with that, or if our support team has already been alerted to it.
I am working with support. The problem that we're having, unfortunately, is intermittent, so it's hard to figure out why it's happening. But we're generating PDF that information is being copied out of the PDF into a field at the bottom of the form. And that's causing issues with bringing up the PDF, the viewer later, where like a shadow of the information that was copied is appearing, even though that field doesn't exist on the other PDF. And we're also having some issues with fields displaying incorrect information. So you run through something the first time and it says, 123 Main Street. You go through a second form and the address should be 456 South Avenue, but it still says 123 Main Street in the viewer unless you click in the field. The information in the field when you click in it is correct, but if you don't click in it, it's wrong.
Is this behavior that you said it's intermittent, so it's not something that you guys can demonstrate 100% reliably?
Not 100%.
Okay.
Probably like 75, 80%.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, that's something with that rate of occurrence, I would expect that our support team should be able to recreate that. If you've already submitted a ticket, I would expect that we should be able to coordinate enough to where we can recreate that with that rate of occurrence. Things that are, we encounter issues that are much more intermittent than 75, 80%. That should be enough for us to identify. And as far as a fix, that sounds like a potential defect. as far as a fix is concerned, that would most likely be in a 7 release.
And I have kind of a related question regarding the document viewer. So when I created the form, it never occurred to me to copy and paste the information. I just retyped it. So of course I never had the problem, but the end users are copying and pasting. Is there an expectation that you are strictly viewing the information in the document viewer and you would not ever, even if the fields are editable, click into it to do anything with it?
Yeah, I think the document viewer is for viewing, is from what I understand. Yeah, there's not an expectation of being able to edit the file itself directly through the document viewer. No.
Is there such a creature?
Good question.
I asked because our end client is very attached to their paper. So they want it to look exactly like the piece of paper would look, and they are still printing it out after they look it up, after they bring it up in the viewer.
I know we have, you're handling PDFs?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I know we do have certain PDF specific steps for PDFs that have form fields on them. We have steps like set form fields and things like that do allow you to edit the data that's in a PDF's fields. As far as it being inline on a form, like on a document viewer, though, currently I don't believe we have that. So that might need to be like a feature request or something to that effect. But like I said, we do have steps that allow you to edit the data that's in fields on a PDF. It's just, it doesn't, the document viewer can't directly kind of hook into that functionality. It's really steps in a flow. So you pass in, your PDF to one of those set form fields steps, for example.
Right. That's how we built the PDF, and we display it to them. And then they need to make a further edit to it.
Right.
Could you do it with HTML display and then passing that out and making a different, like another PDF afterwards, potentially?
Well, I don't know about the HTML display, but I'm effectively, the same form gets touched 3 times, adding pieces of information as you go through each step. The first person, for whatever reason, well, most people do, sees that they can copy and paste the piece of information that they need, and they change it using copy and paste. So basically it's an address, and it's got an entire address, but the end result is only supposed to be a city and state. So they highlight the address, highlight just the city and state, copy, and then paste it into a field that's not in the document viewer, but at the bottom of the form. Send it to the next step, after which I then save it to the data store, rebuild the form with the answer in the correct place, and then keep moving along.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing there is, as it stands, you can, I think what you kind of want, or what your end users would probably prefer, is something really straightforward, like just being able to look at the document viewer and make those changes. And that's not something that we can do. I don't think we can really do right now. So it sounds like you're kind of, the closest thing to it would be to, have components on the form, like text boxes, drop downs, things like that, that they can specify their information in, and then, use those set form field steps after the submission of the form is complete. So, maybe there's a email address field in the PDF, and, you would have a text box or something on the form where the user can say, well, I want to change the email address on the PDF. So I'm going to enter my email address here. And then when the form gets submitted, then the flow will use those set form field.
To create that steps. PDF.
Right. Or, I mean, right. You could even go as far as to do something with a data flow where the form is being updated. or for example, you could loop the form back on itself after submission so that they can see the changes every time they submit. For example, they make some changes on the, in this text box, like email address, they hit submit and the form will, make the change. And then, for example, just as an example, loop back on itself and then redisplay the new PDF with those changes they've made, things like that. Those are all ways to get around the limitation that we currently can't edit inline in the document viewer. I think that's the closest thing you could get without a feature request to allow for that
Okay, and
inline editing.
That's what I'm already doing. So I guess I've
Right.
got the best option out there. All right, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, besides the looping, you could have a preview, like you're previewing the doc viewer there, and we have that data flow, refresh it at any time you change any of those form components there. Just having the data flow then do the logic to build that PDF and replace the old one every time. So it's more of a concise, you're not submitting again and again format, but it's just your preference on whether or not you'd have the data in the data flow or outside of the form in the main flow looping back. So
yeah, the data flow is probably a bit cleaner, honestly, because that way you don't have the.
It would function a lot nicer for the user, I believe.
Right.
Well, except I've got multiple users, so it's not the same person. One person makes one change to the form, they send it to the
it
next
has to
person
pass
who
to
adds
the
their
next
name
one.
and, yeah, pass to the next one, pass to the next one. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Then what you have is most likely best we have.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, we got some more questions here. Next was from Jimmy. So I have a flow execution extension flow. My initial show form step creates an assignment for the current user. I move that completed assignment into the process folder after it's created. This creates a completed form view of the original submission. In the process folder, process view, that completed form doesn't show up in the started state. It will move to whatever the latest state being set is. How can I set the state of that original assignment prior to the process folder being created? Okay, so I think I see what you're saying here.
So does the process folder have to be created after this form, or can it be created before this form so it can get tied to the process you're making?
I'm creating it after so that if the user doesn't submit the form, we don't lose that next sequential request number.
Mm-hmm.
Because that happens quite often. They'll start the process and like, no, I don't need it, and then we just lost that number.
Gotcha, but it is an assigned form to start with?
Yes.
Okay. Because it'd be difficult to update it to a different state since the process folder that you're trying to pair it with doesn't already exist before the assignment is run. As far as like tying those together.
Yeah, I tried changing the state to started as soon as the process folder was created before I moved it to see if it would do it, and it still didn't. It still just moves around as the states change. And then once it gets completed, it's sitting in with all the completed stuff.
Gotcha. Instead of you want it to be locked into that one spot there.
Correct.
I think since it's being added to the folder and not tied to it, it's going to be locked in that spot. Unless, Brenna, do you know of that way for it? Because the only thing I can think of for it is having that process folder created beforehand in order to properly tie that to a state.
How are you moving the assignment into the process folder afterwards?
I think it's just a move step. I'm fetching it and then fetching the assignment and then just doing a move to folder step.
Okay. And so you just want it to say started, but the problem is that the states are being changed before we hit another assignment.
Well, it's almost like it doesn't have a state at all. Because
yeah, it's always available. It seems like it's not getting tied to just the one state.
Exactly. So as this different states change, it's always whatever the current state is or the last state.
And okay, so the state is being the state is being changed, or like the assignment is moving around with state changes?
The
So
state's being updated in the process folder, but that particular original assignment it's just being moved to whatever the current state is.
Right. Instead of staying in the first state.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it's also, if you look at the sequential process history, it's giving me 2 started states.
Gotcha. That sounds. I wonder if set entity state would work differently for that. There's also another step I'm trying to recall.
That's what I'm using, the set entity state, for all my processes.
Okay, and you're using set entity state on what object? The folder?
Yes.
Okay. Are you sure it's set entity state and not set state?
Yep, set entity state.
Okay.
Because I'm giving it the entity ID and then the new state. I'm feeding it the process folder ID as soon as it's created.
There's a step, I'm trying to recall what it's called, but there's a step that sets the flow context as though you were using a setup process folder step, and I'm trying to recall what it's called, or if that could help with this. That one I'm not sure of, honestly. Yeah, because I would expect that if we move the assignment into the process folder, that it sounds like the assignment just does not have that context.
Yeah, I would assume that it would inherit whatever state the folder had when it got moved into that folder, but it's almost like it's empty and just flowing down to whatever the current state
I think
is.
it doesn't have that folder ID like in the in your assignment settings when you're creating it. If you already have a process folder created beforehand, you can tie that together in there, so it'll kind of lock into that place and be aware of the state. But since it's being created without that, I think it's just kind of available in your folder, and that's why it's showing up as something you can interact with the whole time. As far as the 2 started states, I believe there's been a few DTs in it for that, so it just depends on that version why that still might be happening.
Yeah, and I'm doing an initial. Well, I added a set entity state step in there as the started state, so that may be doing it as well. I'm going to delete that to see if it'll clear it.
Okay,
but I was
gotcha.
setting
So
that state.
Writing that in
Yeah,
there.
I was setting that state to started to see if I could force that original assignment into that state, but it didn't work.
Yeah, since it doesn't have that that record or that process folder to tie it actually to, it's probably confused about what that state is actually tying if you're trying to map it in before the folder is created.
No, I've got that set entity after the process folder is created.
Oh, okay.
But before I moved the assignment into the folder.
Ah, okay. To try and make it. I see.
Yeah, because I was thinking the assignment was grabbing the current state when it got moved into the folder, but it's not.
And you said currently how that form operates, it's not any kind of workable chance to make it something where we could create the process folder beforehand?
It's not the ideal. I mean, either way, I can live with it being at the completed, because I've got the title of the submission as original submission. But yeah, I don't want to create the process folder just because then we'll have a bunch of random numbers.
Gotcha, because that's a problem in itself if that was before it. Okay.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a way to do this. It sounds, I'm at a loss for how to associate it after the fact, but I think there should be a way, if there's not already. That, I don't know if that's something that we need to explore more in a support ticket. If you'd like, we can probably submit that on your behalf, or if you want to submit it. because I think we need to explore that a little bit more. If there's, like I said, if there's not a way, I think there should be. And that means that if there isn't currently a way to do that, then that's something that we can add to the product. Because I think that's a viable, that's a common enough use case. If we're not already able to do that, the fact that you're adding it into the folder, in my opinion, should either be close to allowing for that already, just intuitively, that the product should just be aware that you've done that, or that there should be a more explicit way to bind the two things. So
yeah, or be able to change the properties of that completed assignment after the fact.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the only thing is, I'd be curious if what would happen if you did set entity state on the assignment itself, but that might not work either. So I think that's something we need to explore more.
Oh, I didn't think about that. I may try that. If that doesn't work, then yeah, I'll do a support ticket and look into it.
Yeah, I would
'Cause
try that.
I'm feeding it the folder ID, not the assignment itself. So I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and even then, in my opinion, there should be a way to bind them. But yeah, give that a try, and if not, I think we should explore that more in a support ticket.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. All right. This is from Alex. You have a decisions flow that you exposed as a post API. You have an external system that's sending data to update some fields in your flow execution extension object called batch. Batch has a field that is a list of one or many items. Your caller is sending a parameter folder ID to update the batch object. You're trying to use fetch an entity by folder ID and save. You got two questions around this. One is, what are the differences between the update entity and the save steps? And question two, how does the save step know on which record to place the updated information? Okay. So update entity and save. You said save was a step that we created for you?
Yeah, actually, when in the process flow extension, there is one step called save, which presumably acts on that type of data element.
Gotcha. For your user-defined type of batch.
Right.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I thought that those were the right ones to use. Fetch the one that the item that I want to act on, and save on that item. But it's not obvious to me how will the save function know on which record to act.
So what are the inputs to that step that you have, the save from your particular type?
I can show you if you want me to share, but
yeah, we could I believe we could allow you to share if that's easier.
Yeah, probably, because building all this might take time from other people. Give me just one moment.
Okay, so it looks like we can't share during a webinar, but we can, if we create a flow execution. Yeah, you just got your flow execution there. We can look at what the save step inputs would look like for our custom type.
I didn't realize we couldn't share. No worries. Yeah, I got it right here. Although
user defined types. Yeah.
All right, so we got our save, and then you're referring to the update entity step.
Then there's also in the same area where you had the save, you also have the fetch entity by folder ID, I believe.
Fetch by ID.
No, but actually, I was using by folder ID. I have no idea what's the difference between one and the other.
Yeah, I don't. I like to use just the fetch entity step a lot personally, but this, they might be pretty similar, honestly. I haven't really tested the differences between the two. But as far as save and update, let's see. Right. So, I mean, right away, with update, you actually do have to pass in the entity ID. I think it might be simpler to use save. I haven't used update a whole lot. With save, actually, and is there another? Yeah, there's also the save entity stuff as well.
I look at that one too. And
Yeah, save
Looks-
entities is pretty similar to the save. You just pick your type and then pass in that the whole object, like this is asking for that whole object of that specific type already.
Right,
So
and
I'm
then
assuming it pulls in your ID from that object you passed in. So as long as you pass in an ID for save, it should be, believe would do the same thing.
the only question, I think the only thing here is that a lot of the time in with these steps, we have a distinction between I guess a selective update versus I guess a normal update. So this step here, for example, you want to pass in the entire object. So you would have some kind of step beforehand, like a fetch that would output the object, and then you would pass it in. And if you wanted to make changes to the object, you would typically use one of two things. I like to direct people the most simplest thing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's the mapping step. So the idea being that you acquire your object by some kind of fetch or what have you. And then, which I think we should go ahead and map this a little bit. There we go. Let me put this over here. It should have, maybe it's just because I'll give it some arbitrary constant. No. Normally the mapping step is supposed to show the data. That would be, there it is. Okay. So typically with a save step, because the save step requires the entire object, you have to update that. If you want to update like a specific field of that object, you have to change that one field. So just so we fetch the object here, and then we can pass it into this mapping step. And what the mapping step allows you to do is it basically is aware of all of the data in the flow up until this point. So you can see that, just as an example, it is aware of the output of the fetch step. And so what we can do is I can go to build data, and I can cherry pick whichever field I want to modify. So maybe I want to modify field 1 and make this value apples, I don't know. And so now in this object that we fetched, the mapping step is going to modify field 1 to equal apples. And so that whole object in the flow, the mapping step has now modified it. So all of the other fields that I didn't touch here remain the same, but the one field that I did change in this object will now get changed to this value, so that when I go to the save step, I can just select that fetch output, that whole object, because now it's been changed by the mapping step, and the save step will now update that object with the modified field. So that's one way to do it. I like the mapping step because it's very easy. Another way that people do this is they just they'll go to edit output mapping, and well, actually, I think we would need a create data step here. The other way that people do this is they use a create data step. This one is a little less obvious.
But I like the mapping step because it solves what I put in a question 3, which is if my call is not passing every single field in the process folder, if I use save, probably I will obliterate all the fields that were not passed, right? Whereas with this, the fetch will be, mapping step will preserve those that are passed, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because that way, like I said, anything that's on ignore here does not get touched. We're just passing through these other fields at this point.
Now, if this is perfect, and I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that ID field that is in your mapping step corresponds to the process folder ID that the call is sending, right? The process folder ID identifies to me the record that I want to be playing with.
Yep. So whatever you fetch there, that first item, the only things you've changed in the mapping step get updated, then the rest gets all passed into your save step. So it has that ID tying to that specific item.
Yeah, I think
Perfect.
the question specifically was that does the ID correspond to your process folder ID, right?
Mhm. And probably the answer is yes, but I'm not 100% sure. If
Um,
there's an extension ID over there, this is not very well documented, I
I,
guess. And
it's the process folder ID should be the extension ID.
oh, extension ID,
It's
not.
yeah, it's because because they are technically two different objects, but they're related. And in decisions, whenever we have a kind of a tertiary, like a related object to something, we call the related ID the extension ID. That's most commonly how we look at that.
Okay. The other thing that is related to this is this flow is receiving a couple of fields for the order and an array for the items. Now, the array has as many elements as the database in decisions would have. So if the order in decisions has 3 items, the post call will send 3 items in that array, except that in decisions, I have 20 fields and for each item, but the post is only modifying 2 of them, right? And it's always the same 2. So I guess that in order to maintain this logic, I have to have a loop or something. How do I do that? Because the mapping, I don't know whether it will know how many
Mm-hmm.
how many items have been passed, right?
Right. So there you can either perform the loop, which the way that would look would be using probably a for each step. I don't know if you used those yet much.
I use the for each. I can't remember which of the for eaches. I think this is the for each. It's the normal one, right? It's the standard.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's two common ones. There's the for each, and then there is the for loop. The for loop, the for loop is just you give it a fixed number of loops to iterate over. It doesn't really
Yeah.
care about what you're passing into it. Whereas
Yeah.
the for each is you
You
feed
have to
it
pick the
a
result.
collection. Yeah. And it'll iterate based on the quantity of the collection, and then that way you can operate on each item in the array or in the list, so to speak. So I mean, one way you could do that would be, like you mentioned with a loop, you could iterate over. For example, if I pass in a collection of a certain type here, like string, I'll just do a constant. Doesn't really matter. 1, 2, 3. And then you can see that now. Let me make sure that this is, that's fine. I guess I'll just do that. Doesn't matter as long as it's an array. This looks like honestly, like it might be kind of a bug because every time I add something, we might need to note this down. Every time I add something, it's not, there it is. So now that I've set up my for each, you can see that the for each is going to pass out an item every time it iterates. It's just going to be an object called item. So for every loop, we're going to be operating on item. And you said what 2 fields you always want to change?
Yes.
Right. So that makes it easy then, because you can just, for every loop, we're now operating on this item object. And that just means that this item object changes for every iteration over the loop. And so you'll be operating on a new object in the list every time. And so again, you can make a change here and it'll make a change to that field on every loop, and you can just save it on each iteration of the loop as well.
Perfect. Perfect. And I guess that after the done in this for each, I need to do another mapping object for the common parts of the order, right? Because they have the same issue.
Yes. Yep.
And the save goes at the very end, presumably.
Right. Yeah. You want to save it for each object, and and we do have some other. That's not just one way to do this. There's some other ways. There's like a list mapping step that operates on lists. It generates an entirely new list, and then you could do something like a save entities on the whole list. They operate very, very similarly though. So you would just basically, instead of having for each, you would have this step called list mapping. And this one's a little trickier to use, but effectively what it does is you can take in a list and you rebuild a whole new list of a different type. I think this, honestly, this looping is a little more intuitive and a little easier to use, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that there are other ways to do this, but really this is probably one of the easier, like I said, more intuitive ways. So
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very
Yep.
much.
absolutely. All right. And you said we answered your question 3 as well, Alex?
Yeah, because that's exactly with that mapping step that you identify there. I ensure that I'm not clobbering
Right.
with blank data that already had in the flow.
Right. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've got a question from Jimmy. Can you get a multiple file upload entity pre-populated with files that were submitted on a previous step? I want my users to be able to remove files uploaded previously and add new ones, so I don't want to just use a multiple file download entity. Jimmy, maybe you can elucidate a bit more on that.
Yeah, so I've got 3 forms in my flow. So on the original submission, I'm using a multiple file upload where they can, select three or 4 files, and then it's in a flow execution, so it's hanging around out there. On the second step, I am using a multiple file download, which is populating as needed, but I'm having it, if needed, loop back to request more information from the submitter. But I want to be able to populate those files that they originally submitted. And, maybe they did the wrong one, remove that file and then add a new one. But I'm not saving the files to the folder just yet. They're just hanging out in the flow as entities, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. So you've got your first is your upload component, and then you've got a subsequent form with a download component.
Yep.
But you want to give them the option to go back and make changes
Correct.
to what they've uploaded already. Okay. Sure. So
And there's a big gray box on your, there you go.
yeah, I'm always pulling up dialogues and on my one screen. It's a bad habit. I think there's probably a few ways to do that. I'd have to kind of poke around a little bit here with the.
Yeah, I tried mapping the multiple file upload with the file, and when I debug it and look at it, it's receiving the files. It's just not showing up on the entity in the form.
Right. So let me throw up a form here with an upload and download just so I can make sure I remember everything about these components. Oh, no, I want a download component as well.
And while you're building that, I tried setting the entity on that other step and it didn't change the state. So I'll put in a ticket for that.
Okay. Good to know. Let's see, upload test, DL test. Because I know what we could, I mean, there's the question that I'm currently answering for myself really is just what the capabilities of the component is itself. There's definitely ways to do this, not directly within the component. For example, because the file data at that point, all this creates as an output is just a list of file data. So the flow can be aware of that list and manipulate it at will. So we can easily remove. We should easily be, regardless, should be able to easily remove files from the upload.
Does the select multiple files upload have inputs in the flow or no when you put that component on the form?
It should when this with the specify inputs checkbox, which means we can manipulate the list, and we can definitely remove them. In order to add them again, of course, they would have to come to the upload component again. But so what the worst case scenario here is that we have maybe some other component that governs this list and allows the user to remove items. But then the only way to add them, would also be to use the upload in conjunction. So I'm trying to see if maybe there's a slightly more elegant way to do that.
I'm trying to remember if you upload multiple while you're the user uploading. I believe you can X them out if you like wanting to remove
that's
them.
what I thought too.
Correct. And I'm wanting that exact same, when they get
Functionality.
the form back, I want that same functionality.
Gotcha. So like sending in a few, so there's already pre-populated, there's fields here, and then allowing
Yeah.
them to add more, but also still maybe
Yep.
remove previous. Okay,
Exactly.
so we could definitely test that.
Yeah, I'm just finding a dummy file here that I can use.
Yeah, something nice and small.
Sure, that'll work. So when you pass this back in, do you not have this X mark option?
No, actually, whenever it's coming back, there's the multiple input is blank.
Okay, let's see what's going on there then. I'll just add another form and we'll just loop back around. Doesn't matter. Loop back test, sure. And we'll get a button on there.
And I
we'll
set up a input data with a document that I'm feeding in for that file.
So that list of those files that are previously added.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So I'm going to do just that. I'm just going to use the output as the input and debug this guy. Let's see what happens when I upload something.
Yeah.
Okay, we got our X. We loop back. I still have the X. So is this not what you're seeing on your end?
No. But I don't have. I may have watched the recording and see what you did again, but I'm not specifying the inputs. Maybe that's it. I'm in the form itself. I'm giving the inputs up at the top. I'm setting the inputs as a document and then feeding that value back.
Oh, not of a list of file data.
I thought I was.
Yeah, that's the real. I guess so. That's the real question. Is I mean, because this is the first place they're uploading it, right? It's just right here.
Correct.
Right. So I think that's it. I think if you specify inputs and you just use the input here use the output as the input, it will allow that kind of looping behavior where you can always go back and change what you uploaded here.
Maybe that's the key.
Here,
because I was doing
through
the
it
output as the input, but I didn't have that specify input box.
Gotcha. So you might not have been able to actually map those in all the way then.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get 2 here, go forward, come back, take 1 away, go forward, and there we go. Awesome. So yep, I think that's what you're missing is specify inputs and just, map the output to the input.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, now that I know it's possible, I'll get it working. Thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Glad we could solve that one pretty quickly. Okay, so the last and then Sabrina, that last question from Alex was also already answered, so we're good on that. Let's see. I think as of now we don't have any more questions in the queue. Feel free to throw anything else our way. We still got some time left here, so. And Alex is asking about the mapping step. Yeah, I can pull that back up. So, and even as a simpler example, I can even grab something just like the account. So that's the first thing, is we have to actually have some kind of object. Yeah.
One more thing, if you don't mind putting, can you set up a couple of inputs in the whole flow, the beginning of the flow?
Yeah, sure. No problem. It will work too, actually. That's a good point. We don't even need to use a fetch step, because the mapping step, like I said, it just takes all objects or anything available in the flow. Sorry, Alex?
No, the fetch step is good because you're going to be touching some record somewhere, but on top of that, you need some other values that you're passing, right? Perfect.
Yep.
So now when you look at your fetch step, it
should have them. I'm noticing a defect here though, where it makes me, like, I bet I have to either close and save out or replace the step. That's something that we've marked down that we're going to fix now that I've just noticed it. But yes, now that I've closed out of the flow and reopened it, you can see all of the flow data.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to modify, anyway, and I have got quite a few now. I've added basically a total of 3. I've got two items here, account 1 and string test. I've got the output of my fetch. So when I come here, I've got these 3, and of course you've got system constants as well. And so if I want to, let's say your external system is making the call into the flow via API. And one of the things that the start step is passing in is this account 1 value. And same with string test if we want to do both. So I want to modify those 2 records. So for account 1, I need to use build data so that I can expose all of the properties. You can see here that because we have a certain cutoff where if there are so many properties that we don't list all of them so as to not take up too much space on the panel. So I'll just select which properties I want to be modifying on. Maybe, I don't know, department and email address. I want to change those 2 values. And then all I have to do is just change them. I mean, I can select them from flow if I want to, or I can just make a constant. All the mapping options are available here. And then let's say change department. I'm just going to disregard my typo there. And new email address at test. And so now this account 1 input that was passed in at the start of the flow, this whole object is the same except for the 2 fields that I've modified here. And I can do it to the string test as well. I can say new value. And then all I have to do is just, well, with the string, obviously, this is just a field. But with the account object, if I wanted to save this whole object, I could just pass it into, like a save entities or something to that effect.
I think I understand. Probably the use case that I'm looking at is one in which, I don't know, account 1 is what you're fetching in your list of accounts, and string test would be maybe the value of the part. String test 1 is what you would put back to your account item in the database, the decisions database, as maybe the department.
You could, so yeah, you could. I mean, at the end of the day, all that's happening is just that this string test 1 is being changed. So now you could use it however you want to. Same with the account 1 object. The whole object is the same except for what you've changed here. And now every time that you act on account 1 or string test 1 or what have you, every time later on in the flow now that you act on those objects, they will have the new values in this flow.
And only the things that I change in the mapping step are going to be altered. Everything else remain in the database, in decisions database, will remain as it was.
Correct. Yeah. So the mapping step is just going to be changing those objects in the flow, but nothing in the database gets touched until you actually commit it to the database, some kind of save or, similar kind of step.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that save, the one that writes to the database, will, it receives the entire output of mapping step,
Yes.
which only certain fields changed. Got it.
Exactly. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. 100%.
Now I have to make it work here.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it looks like, we had a lot of great questions today. We're coming up to the last 5 minutes of the panel. Still happy to field any more questions if there's anything left. But if not, then this was a great turnout. Very happy that everybody came and asked. We were able to answer some questions for you guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up.